I saw Lubinda had his hand up first, Hamida second, and then you and the, okay. Lubinda, over to you.
So, thank you very much, Ruth. So in my other life, I run an insurance brokerage firm. And, you know, where there's business, we see opportunity. So what we realize that every time there's an accident and maybe a passenger dies or the driver dies, the family are left destitute, and or the family of the client will go to the driver to say, you need to cover the funeral expenses and compensate because you were the driver. Then the platform will say, we are not the employer, we just connect driver and passenger. So I approached Yango. I hope we are not, I'm not going to say some things to breach the contract that I have there. So, yeah, but I'll try to remain remain positive. So I approached Yango and proposed what we are now calling in Zambia trip insurance. So there's an embedded, very like sense, yeah, like sense from every, like when you jump on a Yango drive, when the ride starts, your insurance starts. Immediately the insurance ends, the insurance stops. So if you're in an accident, they will actually pay for your medical fees, they will pay for, if you die, they compensate, both the driver and the passenger. But the condition that the accident should occur when the driver, passenger, when the trip is occurring. So the reason, and this was something which I don't know if you have it with Uber in South Africa. I wanted actually to come here. It's very good that I met him in the morning. He didn't know how happy I was when I heard this coming from there. So just to wind up. So when you're looking at what we are looking for the drivers, yeah, the drivers we are looking for decent work. So I think we should not fight change. We should actually work with change. So how do you provide, what is job decency? They should have, somebody was saying guaranteed income. But this is not a company, it's an app. And it's not made for drivers that work every day. I can leave this place. If I'm driving, I can switch it on and I can drive for 1 hour and go home. Of course, we have those drivers that were traditional. So I think in the legislation, when we propose legislation, we should try to see how the platforms can be, we should make it mandatory for the platforms to collect from every trip a small amount that goes towards a gratuity for the driver, especially if you work more on the app, you accumulate more money for gratuities. Then you also, medical insurance and those. I tried to speak to other platforms. They said, we are not the employer. We don't want to be engaged in that. But legislation should not try to ban. I've heard, let's ban this. You can't ban. We are going into stone age. These things have come to last. If you don't like it, build your own app and compete. So we should fight to find the legislation that is going to maintain the apps, but provide job decency and security for the passenger and the driver. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Jane? Oh yeah, sorry. And then Helene.
Thanks.
And if you can keep your questions short, that would be great, so we can get the questions.
Thanks. My name is Jane. I've worked previously for WIEGO, as was mentioned earlier, but I also worked for a long time in the transport sector and in the trade union movement. And I just want to say that I think Langley's really given us a lot of food for thought. Everybody has, actually, but particularly Langley. And it's really refreshing to hear somebody who's really thinking out of the box. Because I think we've become quite complacent in South Africa. We very rarely think out the box. And the platform economy challenges us to do that. And, you know, I'm thinking, you know, the route of regulation, I think we have to do it. It's an immediate challenge. But it's not going to be the silver bullet for the workers. We've had a sectoral determination in the taxi industry, the minibus taxi industry, for 21 years. And it's hardly made a difference to the daily lives of taxi workers. And that's because of the imbalance of power. And for a lot of other reasons, the absence of implementation and labor inspectors and all sorts of things. So I think we're being thrown a challenge today to think right outside of the box, and a lot of really important examples have been made by Pat and by Langley and others. And I think especially those who are researchers in the room need to help surface those examples. There are also examples even in Airbnb. In Italy, for example, municipalities have established an alternative to Airbnb. It is possible. And I'm sorry, it's not so much a question, but an appeal to all of us to start thinking much more imaginatively and, take up Pat's question of why are we still talking about employees even in the current amendments? Why are we not following our constitution and talking about workers? So big challenge, I think, to all of us.
Thanks so much. Hamida is just behind you. I don't know if you can just pass it.
Thanks very much. So the fortunate part is we both come from the union group, and so it's largely covered by Comrade Jane. But the one issue that I think very few people, and maybe the point that you made, Ruth, and maybe taking it from Mavis, is also about us as supposed users or consumers, right? I mean, there's a lot of our sovereignty as a user of Uber is being severely undermined by this legislation. I mean, I'm not going to be able to choose my Uber driver if I want him to wait for me when I want to come back. He's got to get, or she's got to get some permission from somewhere, blah, 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 blah. And then there's also the branding that you're giving the Uber driver when normal taxi drivers or associations target and are really violent against the Uber or Bolt drivers. So there's a whole lot of things that actually also disempower us as well as the drivers or workers that are within the space. So I just wanted to add, in addition to what Comrade Jane had said. Thanks so much.
George here in the back, and then we're going to move over to this side, and then we'll come to you.
Okay, I think I'll make it quick. Based on my experience from Zimbabwe, we also have Bolt, which we have Bolt and InDrive. And what I've seen over the years is the idea of migrant labor. Most of the Bolt or Uber drivers in Harare, I ask them, they say we come from Bulawayo. I've seen also the same here. Some of them, they're from Zim, and some of them, they're from KZN. And in Zim, there's a tendency, especially among guys, they say, like we see the drivers, then say, okay, choose a female driver. So maybe the feminization of labor within these apps is also a big issue. Thank you.
Okay. Great. So, Kalele, I saw over on this side. Who else had? Oh, you did. Okay. Do you want to go first since Rosina's close to you, and then we'll go.
Hi, everybody. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm a master's student in labor sociology at WITS, and my research interest is the gig economy. So mine is a question to the whole panel, and I feel like they could each give different perspectives. But the platform economy is seen as this flexible and easy to access form of work. Now, how do we introduce regulation while maintaining this flexibility and this relatively easy access to work?
Greetings. My name is Belele from the Southern Center of Inequality Studies. My question is to Langley with regards to alternative. In terms of the tension that we see within this transport space between taxi drivers and Ubers, what can we do with the ecosystem itself? The economics regarding these particular industries, which is your insurance companies, the apps. Besides the apps, you have your insurance companies, your banks, etc., that charge these individuals exorbitant amounts, right? And which then causes tension within the sector as individuals fight for grain. So what can we do to make the ecosystem healthy? And also, just to Stephen, considering that our economy is becoming service-orientated, and because it's becoming service-orientated, former industries, such those in the secondary and primary, are now shedding jobs. And this service sector, being transport and other app ones, are able to take in your lower skilled individuals. Is there a place where we can grow from this? Can this become a point where we can grow and develop from these apps if regulated well and etc.?
We have one up here, and then I see. I don't know, Sydney, if. Okay, we have up here, and then Ben. So we'll do another. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Msile Odongwana. I'm a postgraduate student at Wits, and I have a few questions, but I'm going to try and make them as short as possible, and hopefully maybe the answers will be as clear. The first thing I wanted to ask is, with the e-hailing, they used to have physical, visible offices. I remember I had an instance where I left my phone in an Uber vehicle, and then I managed to walk to the Uber office, which was in Sandton. And when I had a similar situation a few years later, I realized that these people are actually invisible. You can only talk to them on the phone. You don't know where they are physically. I think I had two instances. The other one was also with the Bolt. I don't know why is that, and how can we, as passengers, because it looks like the users, which is the passengers, are very much disadvantaged. And then the other concern is with the banks or the companies, because one of the discussants mentioned that there'll be a person who just buys a fleet of cars or scooters, which is basically exploiting people who are desperate for work. I mean, I've had instances of, I know a guy who was using an Uber, who not bought a car, but you hire a car and you have to pay every second week, every fortnight, you have to pay 7,000 rand, whether you have it or not. And after a short period of time, they're going to take that car away from you. And there's other consequences. You could be blacklisted and all those kind of things. And then the other one will be the informal e-hailing. So this question is more dwelling on regulation and how are we really going to implement the regulations. I'm also a filmmaker, so I was making a documentary in Port Elizabeth, I think about 2 years ago. And then one of my cinematographers, he forgot something, so we had to drive back to his township where he stays. And it's a colored community. So he told me that, you know how dangerous this community is. There is no Uber that comes here. There's no Mr. Delivery that comes here because they get robbed. So there's one guy who's very clever. He's a tech guy, started his own app and is monopolizing the industry because he's got his own delivery app that services his whole township. So you can imagine, I don't know, maybe, the entire township being serviced by one app and one person is benefiting. How do you regulate such things? And also the last one, since most of these app companies are not South African companies, they are American companies, some are European companies. So I know that if you're working for an American company, for example, at some stage you have to sign a contract. I remember at some stage I had to sign a contract which was regulated by the state of Atlanta because I was working for a company which is regulated by the state of Atlanta, and I'm in South Africa, and the offices are in South Africa. So since these businesses are so multinational, how are regulations going to reconcile all these differences and these different rules from different companies? And also knowing that South Africa is a country that is famously known as a country with a very good constitution, the best constitution in the world, but with very little implementation. How do we know that we're going to implement all these regulations that we're talking about in this room?
Okay, great. So,
greetings everyone. My name is Robert Hakwa. I am with the Weber Shanvik. So I just wanted to highlight something as we are discussing. I think part of the key challenge in trying to come up with, regulations, policy making in the South African context, we need to really understand and grasp the understanding that we need to develop policies that are tailored to the context of the African continent or the South African, or to South Africa as a country. And I think that is something that we sometimes, overlook. And then the key challenge that I also wanted to raise is that we have a fundamental problem of surplus labor. We have got a lot of young people that are unemployed. And as a result, they see an opportunity in trying to earn income. So it's all about access at some point to income earning opportunities. Because at the end of the day, if the issue is about classification of workers or employees, the issue is fundamentally everyone wants to earn an income or to generate an income. And at the end of the day, I believe that also the platform economy does that. It's just we need, of course, regulations that are tailored to ensure that also the very people that are working in the platform economy, they can be protected. But it should not be to such an extent that while the intention is to regulate, it may end up even discouraging the very same platforms to either move away and the opportunity that was there is no longer there. So it's kind of like you're looking at it from an investment perspective. It's not only just a labor issue. The main thing is, of course, we want to ensure that we avoid exploitation. So I think that's something that officials or the departments, whoever that is trying to come up with these legislations, they need to also, factor into. Thank you.
Thanks. I just want to say I really like this idea of the alternatives and the cooperatives, and I think we can think about these technologies, it's not just the government creating a new company, but they're not really normal companies. They're like part of the infrastructure of the transport system. And as Langley said, it's not public infrastructure right now, just like, a toll road might not be entirely public, but it is part of the infrastructure of our system. And so I think it makes sense for there to be a public option within this infrastructure. And I think another advantage of that approach is it can unite a kind of cross-class alliance. So even users, get frustrated with these big companies and not being able to get an answer from them when you lose your phone or whatever. But there's other actors too, like restaurant owners, which are largely small businesses. Uber is essentially able to extract a tax from them, and they would also have an interest in this kind of public option. So I echo the support of this kind of idea, and I think it's really, the regulation that's discussed is still important, but I think it's another way to think about the problem because it really is a new type of technology.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Dinero from the FES. I'm quite excited. I think we've had great presentations all in all. Just wanted to mention a couple of things around issues of cooperatives as well, and apps that have been created by workers. And I know in Uganda they attempted this, and we tried to assist in the workers when we're put in a very difficult space. So even as we do it, and I think what Now was saying about the issue that this is still a private space, that we must know the kind of implications on the workers when you go through this. And then on issues of gender as well, there's been a lot of issues around sexual harassment that the women workers in particular have been speaking about, but that hasn't been addressed by Uber. But what I wanted to link it to as well is on these issues of the tax campaign that's happening, and I know it came out quite strongly, and I think we never think about the implications of Uber on the issues of tax and how we link it together with this struggle, but also around the issues of, I was quite excited about the historical element of it coming from 2002 all the way to where we are going today. Going to the ILC, I think for me the big crisis here and what is very important, I think wanted to get from the speakers is to what extent do we ensure that in all this we don't get to a point where formalization in the way that it's been communicated is the best way of answering the question, to the detriment of the people of Africa who are largely informal and use these spaces to operate. Women in borders utilizing these apps to sort of be able to accommodate both the care elements and, of course, their livelihoods. The ITF had a tissue campaign, and I mean, how do we link this to really infrastructural development in our continent? Because in our continent, we can't think about Uber drivers, border drivers, and the likes without thinking about issues of access to toilets, issues of access to space, of just trade. So how do we link those things together? Thank you.
Thanks so much. So we have a very lively debate online about the new motorcycles and how is it that Uber is able to introduce a service on their app in South Africa if it is illegal, actually, for motorcycles to carry passengers. So I think that is a question for Muzi. There's also a question from Marian Dasarath around how does the regulation on transportation currently define the companies? We've been speaking about the definition of worker, but are the platform companies defined as tech intermediaries, as they like to claim, or have they been defined for the purposes of that regulation as transport service providers? Because that shapes the kinds of claims you can make. So the debate isn't only about the classification of workers, but it's also about the classification of the companies. We have another question from EASWE, which is a domestic workers alliance. And as you probably know, one of the big platforms in South Africa, homebred and now expanded to the world, is Sweep South, which is a platform for domestic workers. They're concerned that the Labor Department's implementations of laws seem to be skewed in favor of employers, particularly in the informal sector, rather than aligning with their intended purpose. Could you please provide insight into the reasons behind this approach and outline the steps that will be taken to ensure the department's actions are more equitable and supportive of workers' rights? Stephen, I think this one's for you. Let's see what else is on here. Rosina, I don't know or Fonse, if you want to come in with other things in the chat that I might have missed.
So we have a question from the CMA.
And they're asking, is there an increase of gig work, temp work in the platform economy for youth with digital skills, like programmers, digital creatives, like influencers, graphic designers? What are the regulations for services done by these blue-collar workers in a platform work, and how are the conditions of employment enforced?
So digital skills might be a bit lively, but the enforcement question back to you. Anything else online? Okay. So now I would like to turn it over to the speakers. And I think we'll just go in the order. Each speaker, you have about 2 to 3 minutes to answer all of these questions. Over to you, Omar.
Well, look, I think the first question for me, let me address the question of collective bargaining.
Yeah.
I think we have listened to the official from the department, and the question underlined by the rebuttable presumption is still addressing the question of collective bargaining that seemingly are being afforded now with the new amendments, as a new right for platform workers. I think we must be very clear about this. The labor laws has traditionally not been structured to take into account, this new form of work that has emerged. It has traditionally been for standard forms of employment. And even then, collective bargaining is not an automatic right. You must first be able to secure organizational rights. You must be able to show, in terms of Section 21, that you have the numbers. And you must have either sufficient representation, you must either have majority representation, or you must be significantly representative in order to qualify to be able to bargain. It's not an automatic right. So it's about numbers. Now, looking at our platform workers are organized essentially by new forms of organizations and not the traditional trade unions. All right. But the new amendments also introduces an idea where the unions should now amend their constitutions to organize platform workers and e-hailing workers. So that poses a challenge, because there's a question of organizations like ourselves, who's not a union. We have this constraints in registering as a union. And we are fighting for our independence and also advancing autonomy. And that leaves us with partnering with unions to be able then to do those things. There are also rights to the limit. There are also limitations to the right to representation at the CCMA. So what my colleague is suggesting, that's an automatic right for workers who are not a registered trade union to get representation in the CCMA is not entirely correct. So you will either have to go through, like we did in 2017, we had the Uber 7 workers to join NUPSO. Initially, they were part of SATAL. They had to join NUPSO, where to backdate their, membership. And we were then able to enjoy locus standi at the CCMA. The essential point that I want to make is that whether we like it or not, we will be faced with a jurisdictional question in the first instance. And then secondly, if you are unable to show the numbers, you do not qualify for organizational rights.
Thank you.
There are a number of other things that I wish to respond to, but I will leave it for...
Oh, but if there's anything that's burning...
Let me try. The question of... I'm listening to all of the questions, and the point I want to make is that it is like as if I have been in a national executive extended committee meeting of the National E-Hailing Federation of South Africa. All of the questions that you are raising here are the questions that we are grappling with. We're grappling with the question of autonomy in terms of how it relates to us as an organization, how it relates to us in terms of how we respond to building and shaping and changing the patterns of ownership to be able to counter, the dominance of venture capital and these multi-tech giants. And the question of alternatives came up, and we are continuing to explore it. But let me just also indicate we are faced with what has been termed as a bourgeois dilemma within this sector, where some regard themselves as, and this is being entrenched by the amendments to the National Land Transport Amendment Act, for operators to see themselves as business people. There's a conflicting clause of sort of class interest that is inherent in the composition of the sector that we are in. And you will find, I think the colleague also raised, one of the colleagues raised that you have fleet owners. So fleet owners exist at different levels. You have fleet owners as proxies of these multinational app companies like Easyway. They have car rentals that they rent out to the drivers, exorbitant fees, people lose the cars, they are disadvantaged. Then you have within our sector, operators who are defined in terms of the National Land Transport Act, which we regard as platform workers who are espousing kind of social entrepreneurs and business people. They are our very comrades that belong to our organization because we have a hybrid model, right, to leverage power. They themselves would have maybe 2-3 cars and employ a driver. So in terms of the current legal framework, if you apply for an operating license, you must sign what is called a Form 20. My colleague from the Department of Transport can testify to this as well. A Form 20 where you as the platform worker who employs a driver have to give a declaration that you will comply with the Basic Conditions of Employment Act and the labor legislation. But your relationship, contractual relationship that's tied to the entity, they do not have that condition imposed on them. So that is something that I think is very important that needs to be. The question of formalization exists at 2 levels. One, formalization with a new dispensation, new framework. Government has moved swiftly to want to ensure that there's formalization within the sector, given, it has become quite problematic with lots of strike actions and stuff. Organizations need to be controlled. So in the provisions of the Act, also there is room for associations, not for gain who are organizing. So they need to be formalized in order to engage with departments, and the government do not want to engage in a fragmented way with too many organizations. So they're pushing for formalization, but that formalization is also tied up to the mandate of government to empower and to help and to ensure that, these organizations are playing a meaningful role. So that is at the one level, but it's also, it has its own weaknesses, because at another level, there's also formalization of the new forms of organizations who need to formalize themselves, because government from the outset said, no, we can't talk to people that are not registered, that are not organized. But at the same time, the objective is also to speak to compliance. And the question of compliance is far-reaching, because it involves, getting everybody into the tax net, so that, it's particularly, my colleague alluded to that, particularly also, the minibus taxi industry. There's a question of subsidies which are being challenged now. In the public transport, it's only the buses and the trains. So those are some of the questions that we need to be very clear about. There was one other important question that I wanted to just quickly respond to, is the question of representation through NETLEC. My colleague said that, and alluded to or referred that we were represented at NETLEC. Yes, NETLEC plays a significant role in terms of, policy development stuff. But I think need to make it very clear that new forms of organizations were not necessarily represented there. It is the mainstream organization that have assumed to speak on our behalf. But that's also fine, because we need to collaborate with them, because there is also where power lies, but there are limitations in that. I need to point that out. Exclusions that was referred by my colleague, I think the speaker actually pointed out when it came to other sectors of work, and platform work does not only exist in a narrow sense, it also now moved into caregiving, right? We have, for example, in the Western Cape, there is an app that has been developed called We Care, that is organized as a collective, a cooperative kind of collective for domestic care workers. And so that means, if we look at it more broadly in terms of the question of formalization, the informal economy, on the hinges of informal and informal, a lot of people are still excluded. And that is the point I think I need to make. And I want to just also say, we also appreciate the honesty of the Department of Transport in their response, that there's been delays and all of that, and also the acknowledgement that was alluded to, that there is a moratorium that they are applying to. It's very interesting, and I want to anchor that is a demand or request that we have made to the Minister of Transport, but we have not had a response to it. But I'm happy that it's on record that my colleague, Mr. Similani, has said that they have made a submission and they're waiting for a moratorium. I've spoken about that, the inconsistent application of law. Some are more equal than others. The app companies are enjoying still a lot of privilege and getting away with murder. So those things, I think, lastly, the supply and demand model it's a big challenge. And as long as the app companies have still got dominance and control over data, and there's lack of data transparency, the supply and demand model is based on different spheres of government, both at the municipal level, at the metro level, and also at the provincial level. And the number of operating licenses are determined based on what is called an integrated transport plan. And if integrated or provincial transport plans are not in place, they cannot determine what allocation of operating licenses to make. But the app companies have been reluctant to release that. But now I think there's a positive provision in the National Land Transport Amendment Act that gives them the regulatory entity or the planning authority the power to serve notice to the app company to request certain information, including to the quality of the service and its operations. And that, by the way, opens the opportunity also for asking for very clear sets of data. And if they don't do that, they may face a fine. It will be contravention. They may fine up to 200,000 rand. And I think that's a positive element, and it needs to be strengthened, however, because the question of implementation still faces us starkly. We have very beautiful things that's written on paper, but when it comes to implementation, there's a serious gap. Lastly, also the question that policies must take into account the conditions under which we exist. And I think that has been a serious weakness in the overall regulatory reform. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And in fact, as a researcher, the issue of data is a big one because most of these companies are actually fairly opaque, right? And so having access, how many workers, actually, how many platform workers are there? Do we know, on what terms? What are the algorithmic coding approaches that they're using and so on? All of that would be really important. There's a lot of questions to you, Stephen, so I'm going to pass those to you next.
Thanks. I think myself and Omar, we need a bilateral to just clear up certain issues between ourselves, the misunderstanding. For example, when you talk about representation, it was only a response to say the amendments don't give workers the opportunity to appear. And I said, when you accord these rights to workers, you also give them the right to appear. And the issue of representation, you are quite correct. If you're a union, you can appear the CCMA. And the issue of organizational right appearing at the workplace representing is a different ballgame, that one. And I think you are right, but also we must caution ourselves in terms of our legislation that there's, yes, freedom of association is a constitutional right, but in terms of that constitutional right, there were unintended consequences because of that. If you have looked at Marikana, it was because of intended consequences, unions fighting themselves for that space, and which is different from CCMA. You look at the gold mine, I don't know, where there was AMCO vis-a-vis organizational right, precisely because of proliferation. Before it was easy, unions are competing. That's why I say there's a need for dialogue between you and I, so that we explain and we clear up these issues. Yeah, thank you very much for that.
So can I just say something quickly? Marikana was caused by land policy, not by transport or union policy. Do that analysis.
Well, that's an opinion. I think you see the difference between me and you. I'm an animal of statue. What I say I articulate from, and ideological issues, but I hear what you are saying. I only articulated what the department said. Beyond that, we'll deal with these issues. Let's deal with the issues that you have raised. Yeah. You have asked whether the definition is sectoral or
what would be the steps? Sectoral determination?
No, it won't be. I don't think it's a sectoral determination. It will fall under the labor relations, will be governed by labor relations, not sectoral determination. Although the definition itself is sectoral, or because of peculiarity conditions of these workers, you needed to bring them in. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you had to focus on the definition of presumption, focusing on them. Therefore, the intention was to bring them, and it's quite correctly to talk about the issue of collective bargaining. Mm-hmm. Immediately when you bring them in the labor relations, then you extend the rights that the labor relations, freedom of association, collective bargaining, all those issues, and rightly so to say, some issues you can't address until you have those rights, collective bargaining to engage and what. But the other issue that my colleague has raised in responding to issues of collective bargaining, that they need those rights. But in certain bargaining councils, already there are collective bargaining agreements, for example, road freight industry, and we needed to amend the legislation in order for you to be protected in such bargaining councils. But that does not underscore the engagement for, collectively bargaining for the whole sector. And the issue of enforcement of those rights, you are quite correct. The issues of security towards employers, I think those are perceptions. If you look at current labor law amendments, and in terms of the BCA, in terms of enforcement, you would see that when the employer does not pay the minimum wage, the penalty will be double that wage. with penalties for not paying again. And again, if the employer does not pay for the second time, it will be 3 times. And there will also be penalties that will be charged. Therefore, you must tell me if the law gives you 1, twice, and you flout the laws again 3 times, you would say those laws are skewed towards employees, employers. I'm not sure. And again, when you look at these current amendments, you will see that in terms of enforcement, the law allow now trade unions to accompany shop stewards, to accompany inspectors, labor inspectors, if they go and inspect the workplace, precisely because you want to deal with these issues that inspectors, what they are doing and what. Some of the issues are perceptions, maybe some might be realities, but we want to clear up these issues. That's one of the issues that I'm saying in terms of looking at what we have introduced in terms of labor law amendments, whether they are skewed towards employers or they are skewed towards workers. And there are some issues that are also issues of perception. You know, it seems as if when you talk about labor laws, you kill issues of flexibility or unemployment and all those things, where people want to attribute unemployment. Employment is labor laws are not panacea for employment. They are part of contribution to issues of employment. For example, issues of geopolitics, what is happening, issues of ports, what was happening, electricity, where the ports, you could not export the issue of electricity, industries would be affected and all those things. Therefore, to assume that when you deal with labor laws, those are the issues that, colleagues have said in this meeting, in this house, that certain countries have regulated platform economy. And I'm not sure whether it has dwindled or the industry is still thriving. Now, why, when you come to South Africa, do we assume that by introducing the legislation, and that's what was said when we were introducing sectoral determination for domestic workers,
and the national minimum wage,
national minimum wage and what. And that has never been reality in terms of what you have asked in terms of the question. But again, the other colleague there, in terms of our legislation, it's regulated flexibility in our laws. Yeah. You know, our laws allow you 45 and you can work around those issues. The issues, yes, we have floor rights, but we have issues, core rights that you cannot negotiate, but there are some core rights that you can negotiate in terms of flexibility, in terms of our labor laws. Therefore, bit caution or want to caution colleagues who think that labor laws make it difficult to dismiss or to do all those things. And our unemployment actually bear a test to the fact that such high number of people who are dismissed, looking at CCMA stats, it's difficult to dismiss labor laws. You know, there are perceptions and realities. Therefore, I don't see introducing these laws to the platform economy and that will impede employment. No, they will not impede employment. Instead, the nature of business is that if you introduce something as a cost, they pass it to consumers. That's the nature of business, how they will do. The oil, petrol that is increasing, you will be paying for it, not, therefore, is the nature of business. Therefore, labor laws have never, where I'm sitting, it's just perceptions that we must deal with and clarify issues. And what is the other issue? A colleague spoke about issue of gratuity, you know, people driving and be paid. I don't think it's a good one. We must introduce, there is a national minimum wage. And in this national minimum wage, you will see that we are trying to separate those two issues because we don't want people to be paid by gratuity and say monies, when somebody is supposed to get the national minimum wage, what is due to the person for working, then you put gratuity in order to erode the national minimum wage. Pay the national minimum wage. Let gratuity be plus on what a person is getting, but should not just create problems for national minimum wage where you count these issues. And the issue of cross-border regulations and entities that are outside South Africa, I think it will be a challenge, I must admit. But what I want to say, in terms of our law, there's a principle that is called joint and several liability. If I can't find you, the ones who are in South Africa calling them intermediary, intermediary? Yeah, intermediaries. You can bring them to the CCMA or to the department. If I can't find you, I must cite the one that I can find. I think our laws are dealing with all these issues. I'm not sure I've dealt with all the questions.
No, thank you. And thank you for reinforcing this point that high unemployment is not an excuse to roll back labor protections. That really employment strategies are separate from that, and that too often we start to try to innovate on what should be basic entitlements and rights. So thank you for reminding
Maybe
us.
the last one is for my colleague about our economy surviving on informal sector and what. Well, I don't think it's true. There is informal sector, we must agree on that one. Informal sector is there. But comparing, if our informal economy was big, our unemployment would have gone down as compared to other countries in the continent where you see the informal sector is so huge and big. Therefore, we will be careful indeed in implementing the laws. We'll try to bring that flexibility, but it's not correct. We don't survive as this economy. This economy is too formal. Thank you.
Thank you. So, we're a little over time, but I want to make sure to allow the other speakers to come in. Muzi, do you want to come in? You've been debating also online. I see you've been responding to some of the online questions, but anything you want to add?
Going to Pretoria?
Are you going to Pretoria? No.
Oh, he had to leave.
Oh,
Okay.
you're not going to Pretoria.
Landley, over to you.
Yeah, okay. So there's the once famous former president, disgraced president, I think, said, it's the economy is stupid. And that's actually what it is. It's fundamentally about the economy and a broader economic policy. And I'm looking at all the nature of the questions. I'm trying to actually figure out. So we have a South Africa, and I'm going to try and do it through a little more philosophical and answering route, trying to get it. We have a state that says it's the raison d'etre, reason for existence, is to foster economic growth and improve the quality of life. And that sounds fantastic. So we all think it's fine, it's what we vote for, it's what goes on. But you can get job shedding growth. You realize shareholder value without actually focusing on workers, and you still get growth. If you took those two ideas and you shifted, that the reason for the state, and besides the controlling a monopoly on violence, is effectively to create sustainable livelihoods within sustainable human settlements. Your obsession with growth starts to shift. Yes, you need growth in order to actually create a mechanism by which taxation and everything else starts to happen. But your reason for the state starts to change. And what actually has to occur means that sustainable livelihood means you actually have a mechanism to work continuously. And it brings in all the GBV issues, which don't get addressed because the notion of sustainability doesn't get looked at, a whole circular economy perspective. And that has to be embedded within the nature of human settlements. And what is a human settlement? The Marikana massacre, I said, is linked to land policy. And one can go into a big debate about how it is, but connect the dots and you'll find that linked to the failure of land policy. We should have nationalized all land in 1994. We couldn't because of the negotiated settlement. And you give 100-year leases or something like that. But the nature of the land policy and the contestation between traditional land and all of those things is what created the notion of those mechanisms. What I'm arguing for in this is effectively a democratic commons that has to be built up. And it requires activism to actually deal with that. So the nature of there are 5 issues in relation to regulating the platform. The first thing is reclassification and labor rights. It's reclassification of workers and companies in terms of what they really are. And what does it mean in relation to the idea of a country, if you want to use that? Maybe we need a global government and one currency for the whole planet. That's another idea, as in Star Trek. You need social protection and income security. So universal social protection floors and portable benefits across platforms. If you shift from one platform to the next, your benefits should be portable and articulate according to that mechanism. You need the regulation that creates algorithmic transparency. We have no mechanisms to understand what is going on within those algorithms. And if you want to operate in the particular country, we need to, and this is what open source systems are about. You need data rights for workers. A fundamental understanding about what a data right for a worker is has never actually been written. And that's linked to collective bargaining rights. You need public, cooperative platforms. So you need state-supported platforms and state-supported cooperatives that develop those platforms. Fundamentally, and this is what India put forward in the G20 last year and has been driving since they, in fact, chaired the G20, is digital public infrastructure. What are the elements of those digital public infrastructure? You need to pull it all together to actually say how, in effect, the platforms operate on that infrastructure. And then you need industrial policy for digital sovereignty. South Africa is in the process of deindustrialization. That deindustrialization is being tracked by the chair that we set up on industrial policy at the University of Johannesburg. There's work that's been done in the Department of Sociology, on sociology here at WITS, on the limits of digital capitalism and what's actually going on within its subcomponents. So the state needs support locally developed platforms. So one of the things we've done, so you know about Netflix and the streaming capabilities and all of that, within the CSR has been a mesh network that's been developed for a locally produced streaming system that can be developed in rural areas. And it's a South African technology developed here that needs to be rolled out and developed through the process that people can get access to streaming systems. We need, and through that, retain the value within the national economy. There's in effect, a lot of things that be people, Yanis Varoufakis, talks about the emerging digital feudalism. And right at the top, you have the kings. And the kings are the platform owners. It's the corporates who are Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, etc. Sitting under that, in the countries, you have their partners, or the major gentry, or the princes, in effect, that become the structure by which you actually operate with those owners in your country, because we are country-based. Then you have the minor gentry, which are your content developers, your app developers, all of these mechanisms that are used to create that which you actually want to consume, etc. Right at the bottom, you have the proletariat or the precariat, because it's a precarious situation in which you live, where you pay for your right to exist in cyberspace. And you pay either financially or with your data. And that data is a crucial issue, because that is becoming the oil of the new system that's actually fueling how this thing operates. And until we start to look at all of those interconnections and how they move across systems. We spoke about mining. We're talking about digital systems in mines. You're talking about augmented reality systems within mining workers and rock drillers and things like that. All of that is actually coming. There are simulated stopes that are starting to happen. There are mechanisms to find out how do you find to create maximum extraction from a seam while leaving most of the rock behind. So all of those technologies and things like that, and it's cutting across. You're getting digital agriculture. I can go on, okay? And all of this is going to actually impact the very nature of the work that everybody is doing, because digital cuts across everything. And the development of cooperatives are actually quite crucial, because it's the only mechanism that you can develop power is through collective action. Because otherwise you are told, no, you don't have the technical skill. and you're left out. So yeah, there's a lot of things I could go on into it, but I was trying to encapsulate it within a paradigm of change that people need to understand how the world is moving and where power is starting to shift to.
Thank you so much. I think you've given us an 8-point program, and I think a challenge for us as researchers to think, about these questions. Each one of these could be a research topic, but in our specific context. Pat?
Okay, I just have a couple that I'm going to respond to. The question of the difference between the informal economy and platforms.
Sorry, Pat, I left out one thing, is the thing on the youth and the things. One of the things our department developed was what was called MLab. And there is a process which has developed a system where you can go online and there's an app service. So they built app developers and so forth. And it connects to finding opportunities within the labor market and so forth. And they've also developed another platform called Empower, where power is spelled P-O-W-A, which is about women and how women can access various components within it for systems around the whole digital system itself. Okay. Sorry about that.
So the issue about the difference between the informal economy and platform work, and that it must be terribly different because of the fact that we have these representatives of big capital through the platforms. Actually, in the whole informal economy, there are, in different sectors, there are different relationships with big capital. It depends, the precise nature of the relationship depends on the work. Waste pickers, there is big waste mafia. Ask me, I came from a town where a former mayor of us is on trial for that. The issue is that the ILO defines the informal economy work as work which is not properly regulated and doesn't have proper, it either doesn't have laws and policies or it has insufficient laws and policies. So that applies to street vendors, waste pickers, taxi drivers, informal fisher people, agricultural workers, the whole lot. Platform work shouldn't necessarily have been informal. Why is it? Because it's also insufficiently regulated with insufficient policies and legislation, because governments haven't kept up. As it's come in, they've been lagging behind. So basically it's lack of regulation that has informalized platform workers. So they share the same disadvantages as those other classes of workers who are not properly regulated and certainly not properly protected. So the actual role of capital, as I say, each sector has its particular relationships with the particular capital interests that operate within that sector. Now, somebody asked, what is job decency? There is a big misunderstanding about this issue, and the word decent seems to confuse everybody. I can remember some of our politicians talking about decent work, and they then compared it with prostitution. It was really very crude. The issue of decent work has got the 4 pillars that were mentioned. It's the right to employment opportunities. It's the or work opportunities, because some of it is not employment. The rights at work to form your organizations of your choice with freedom of association. The right to have access to social protection, which just about everybody in these sectors doesn't have, and the right to collective bargaining. And that applies to everybody, whether you're an employee or not. Those are the 4 pillars of decent work. A decent job is a different issue. Once you talk about a job, you're already talking about a particular kind of work. So we talk about decent work because that's the concept that was developed by the ILO. And then there are many different instruments in the ILO that look at what does decent work look like for the informal economy, for the transport sector, for the fishing sector, for whatever, for women. And so, it's a concept of having those rights, and it doesn't just mean highly paid work. Living wages would be about it, and so on. But these other kinds of social wage issues, like for example the social protection. So when we talk about decent work, it's important to kind of be mindful of the fact that we're talking about that, because the term decent jobs, ends up meaning all sorts of stuff depending on whoever's using it and what they happen to have in mind, which often has very little to do with the concept of decent work. The issue about regulating multinational corporations, every single kind of work that we have has got a class struggle that happens in it. It's got workers and it's got the capitalists. What the capitalists look like differs according to the sector of work. In this particular case, the capitalists are the owners of the platforms. It's not the platforms themselves, because they get programmed by somebody. That's somebody who programs them are the people that do that. So the best known one in this particular sector seems to be Uber. Of course, in another sector, it's Airbnb. In another one, it's Amazon. Those are the big multinationals that operate in these sectors. But of course, it's possible for ordinary people to develop this technology. The technology is not rocket science. It doesn't have to wait for robots to come, which was the scare tactic that got used. Oh, you better be careful about fourth industrial revolution. Robots are going to take your jobs. You don't need to be a robot because, as somebody has said, a guy in a township can develop an app and actually run a whole lot of services in that township, and then have also a mafia operation to keep the competition out, which is what that story sounded like. So I think we mustn't confuse the issue when we talk about digital work to assume that everything must be done differently. So, of course, every sector needs to have its particular legislation, but labor rights don't need special regulation for every kind of worker. We have labor laws that apply to manufacturing workers, mine workers, farm workers. Domestic workers used to have their own. They're now coming in line with the rest of it. And there's no reason why platform workers shouldn't come in line as well as street vendors, waste pickers, because we have to catch up on this issue of own account workers in our law. Once we've done that, we'll be able to cover all the different kinds of work, because those rights belong to every single kind of work, no matter how the person who controls you wants to call you or misclassify you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Pat. And finally, Mavis, thank you for hanging on online. I don't know if there's anything you want to add and close us out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I have two things to add to that. One of the issues that I picked is the question of how do we make regulation benefit platform workers while some keep independent contractor status? So we are aware that some platform workers value their flexibility and that they want to remain independent contractors, and that is fine. But right now, independent contractor means no protection at all, and that's not a real choice. So for us, I think we need a third way where protections can travel with the worker, not with the label of who they are. So for us as a starting point, SATUC will be advocating for, three alternatives, like one, portable social protection, where, a small percentage of every transaction goes into a worker-owned fund where for sick leave, injury, maternity, and pensions. And that it can actually work across multiple platforms and across borders, because we are mindful of the fact that in the platform economy, there is also a lot of, as mentioned, women, young workers, there's a lot of migrant workers that need to be protected. The second thing is collective bargaining rights for all platform workers, regardless of their legal status. So for us, there should be no more, anti-competitive clauses. Workers must have the right to negotiate fares, appeal deactivations that happen, and also be able to demand, transparency. The third thing is, a third legal category of, dependent contractor with partial protections like minimum wage, accident insurance, and due process without losing, their flexibility. The goal here is not to force everyone into employment. The goal is to ensure that no platform worker, whether independent or employee, is left without dignity, safety, or a voice. That is what, decent work, what is the decent work agenda that we talk about look like. And that brings me to, how then we can open our space as trade unions to accommodate platform workers. How can we open our constitutions to organize platform workers? And my honest answer, I'm happy that I see that there are trade union organizers also from some of our affiliates in this call, is that most union constitutions were written for a different era, for permanent jobs, single employer, physical workplace, whereas platform workers fit into none of those that I've mentioned. So we need, 4 concrete changes. 1, to redefine worker to include platform workers, regardless of whether that regardless of their classification as employee or independent contractor. Secondly, we need to remove physical workplace requirements and allow digital branches or sectorial, branches organized by platform type. For example, e-hailing, delivery, domestic work, or care work, as mentioned earlier. And the third one is we need to also allow flexible membership, models. That can happen per trip contribution, weekly payments, digital onboarding via WhatsApp, and no more fixed debit orders from an irregular income, because as it is, it becomes a bit problematic when you talk about organizing these, because then as trade unions we envisage, how are we going to be able to deduct membership from source, which is what, unions are used to. So when we talk about AI and technological changes, we need to think outside the box. And these are some of the issues that we need to be really thinking about. And then the fourth thing is, explicitly ensuring that we protect, platform organizers, and add a clause in our constitutions to say that the union will defend any member facing deactivation, for organizing. Satuk, I think there is the ILO. There are so many, legal organizations that we can work with to draft a model constitutional amendment, in the various, languages of the affiliates that we represent, for our 22 affiliates. And then also make sure that we facilitate peer exchanges with unions, in Kenya and Brazil that have already done this. If our constitutions are going to assume a factory gate, we will never organize a worker logging in from a car at 10 p.m. on a Sunday. And so we need to rethink this, because the change starts with us. A union should be a safe space, for every worker, for everyone. And we should be more accommodating. We should be able to educate, other workers so that they are not apprehensive when we approach them, that we need to organize them. And then lastly, mindful of the time, is, going forward, I believe that the real test of a roundtable is not what we say here, but what we do afterwards. So I think for us as SATUC, there are 3 concrete pathways that I think, people can plug into regional discussions ahead of the ILC in June 2026. And it's just around the corner. So what we've been doing is to come up with a SATUC regional working group on platform work, establishing this regional work group specifically to coordinate our advocacy ahead of the ILC. But also what happens is that usually the SADC Ministers of Employment and Social Partners do have a pre-ILC meeting, where last year, we came up with a position on the conventional platform work. And then that position, SADC went into the, to meet other African governments with a position, which then made the agreed that we all rally behind each other, for a convention. And I think that is why we were able to achieve, what we achieved last year. So now this year, I'm still yet to get to know the dates because Satuk sits in that meeting to say, before we can actually go into that meeting, what position we draft as a sort of like a SADC common position on the ILO convention, and that we can actually translate the Blue Report into national advocacy toolkits that I've mentioned, before, as well as ensure that we coordinate cross-border solidarity among platform workers. Because another thing is that we go to the ILC, when we get there, we have all these people from traditional, employment going there with the governments, and the platform workers are not there themselves. So you can't speak for people when they are not in the room. We don't believe in that. Nothing for us without us. That's one of the things that we always say. So how you plug in, I think we are going to have, I've been talking to Pat, we are going to have another discussion, virtual meeting after this. So where we'll be inviting WIEGO, academics and other sympathetic government officials as observers into that meeting. And then the second thing is, I think it's going to be very important going forward to have national level consultations. I know that governments come as a tripartite ILC, and that some governments do actually have meetings before going to the ILC. So it is going to be very important that these national dialogues, if maybe we can encourage that they are held, and that trade unions are part of, trade unions and also association of platform workers, because they're not unionized, can actually be part of those national level consultations. So, and I think we can, Pat, work on a template for national consultations that anyone can adapt if they so need to. Then the third thing is that we would encourage everyone to join the Global Labor Coalition, to the ILC. So for us as Satuk, we are part of a broader global labor coalition coordinated through the ITUC and UniGlobal. And what this does is then we coordinate worker testimonies to the ILC, lobby government delegates from our region, as well as share draft amendments to the convention text. So how people can plug in is, if your organizations have observer status at the ILO, you can actually attend the ILC. If not, you can still contribute to position papers, research, and other testimonies. But you can also contact us, Satuk and also ITUC Africa, to be added to the coalition, mailing list. Some of these are some of the efforts that are going to be concretized. And but if you contact us, we'll keep on, updating and giving you feedback about that. So the final word, I think, is that the ILC is just here, June 2026, and it's only like less than 2 months away. We cannot afford to wait, before we start organizing ourselves. So my invitation to everyone in this room is that do not live here without plugging into one of these pathways that I've mentioned. Speak to me, speak to Pat, speak to some of the people who spoke in the room. Speak to your national unions. Let us ensure that when the world meets in Geneva, Southern Africa speaks with one voice, and that voice is rooted in the real experiences of platform workers in Gaborone, in Windhoek, Johannesburg, Lusaka, Harare, and Maputo. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've run well over time, but I think it's a sign of just how hot this topic is. Thank you for everyone who was so generous with their time, with their comments, pushing us to think outside the box, reminding us of what avenues there are to make change. There will be, WIEGO is organizing a series of webinars in the coming months. So we're happy to share those on digitalization and the platform economy. And next semester, around September, October, we'll have another gathering of these. We'll have a different chair, and there'll be a much better timekeeper. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah,